Hi everyone. If you love learning English through stories, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. Today's story is about love, misunderstandings, and a wedding planner who discovers that sometimes the sweetest surprises come when you least expect them. Hi, I'm Emma Collins, and I'm 32 years old. As a wedding planner in New York City, I've helped create hundreds of perfect moments for other couples. But now I find myself in the middle of my own love story. One that's about to teach me more than I ever expected about trust, love, and the importance of letting go of control. I remember the exact moment I realized I was too much of a control freak. It was a warm spring morning, and I was standing in my Manhattan office, surrounded by mood boards, fabric swatches, and the gentle hum of my assistant Kate typing away at her computer. I was doing what I always did, obsessing over every tiny detail of an upcoming wedding, while simultaneously planning my own. "Emma, you need to breathe," Kate said, not even looking up from her screen. "The Morrison wedding isn't for another 3 months, and your own wedding isn't until next fall." She was right, of course. But that's the thing about being a professional wedding planner. You know exactly how many things can go wrong. And when it's your own wedding, well, that's a whole different level of pressure. Let me back up a bit and tell you how I got here. 3 years ago, I was coordinating what I thought would be just another high-profile wedding at the Foundry in Long Island City. The venue was stunning as always, with its industrial chic architecture softened by the thousands of fairy lights we'd strung across the ceiling. Everything was going perfectly until I received the call that would change everything. Our celebrity chef had food poisoning. I remember standing there, phone in hand, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with an emergency. That's when Kate mentioned a rising star in the culinary world who had just returned to New York after years of working in France, Thomas Mitchell. "He's been featured in several food magazines," Kate had said, scrolling through his Instagram profile. "He specializes in French-American fusion cuisine." I made the call, praying he'd be available. An hour later, Thomas walked into the kitchen with a quiet confidence that immediately put everyone at ease. He had warm brown eyes, slightly messy dark hair, and the kind of smile that made you feel like everything would be okay. And it was. More than okay, actually. The food he prepared that night wasn't just a meal. It was a story told through flavors. He combined classic American comfort food with French techniques in a way that had the guests raving. I remember standing in the corner of the reception hall, watching him explain to an elderly grandmother how he'd updated her family's pot roast recipe while still keeping its soul intact. That night, after the last guest had left and the cleanup crew was finishing up, I found Thomas sitting on the venue's steps, still in his chef's whites, looking up at the New York skyline. "Thank you for saving my wedding," I said, sitting down beside him. He turned to me with that same warm smile. Maybe it was the wedding that saved me. I've been looking for the right reason to come back to New York. We talked until the sun came up, our conversation flowing as naturally as the East River behind us. He told me about his dreams of opening a restaurant that would bridge cultures through food. I shared my passion for creating perfect moments and my secret fear that I'd never find my own perfect match because I was too busy planning other people's happiness. From that night on, Thomas became my go-to chef for special events. We worked together so often that people started joking about us being a package deal. 6 months later, during a food tasting for another wedding, he kissed me between the appetizer and main course. A year after that, he proposed on those same Foundry steps, where we first talked all night. Everything was perfect. Or at least, it seemed perfect until last week, when I found those receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, tucked away in Thomas's desk drawer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, I'm standing in my office on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by wedding plans, some for my clients, some for myself. The wall behind my desk is covered in photos of happy couples whose special days I helped create. Among them is a candid shot of Thomas and me from that first night, both of us laughing about something I can't remember. Kate took it without us noticing, and now it's my favorite photo of us. My phone buzzes with a message from Thomas. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I have something special planned." I smile at the message, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. As a wedding planner, I know better than anyone that the perfect moment often comes from embracing the unexpected. But as a bride-to-be, that's a completely different story. Kate's voice breaks through my thoughts. "Emma, the Andersons are here for their consultation." I take a deep breath, straighten my blazer, and put on my professional smile. Time to help another couple plan their perfect day while trying to figure out if my own is slowly unraveling. One thing's for certain. Being a wedding planner has taught me that love stories rarely follow the carefully planned script we write for them. Sometimes they have surprises in store that we never could have imagined. And my story? Well, it's just beginning to take an unexpected turn. The Andersons turned out to be the kind of clients wedding planners dream about: decisive, reasonable, and clear about what they want. But even as I walked them through venue options and color palettes, my mind kept drifting back to those receipts in Thomas's drawer. It started 3 days ago when I was looking for our shared catering contract template on his laptop. Thomas and I had agreed to merge our businesses 6 months ago, my wedding planning expertise with his culinary artistry. It made perfect sense professionally, even if Kate had raised an eyebrow about mixing business with pleasure. "Just remember," she'd warned, "some ingredients don't blend well together." I should have listened. Because there, tucked between tax documents and vendor contracts, was a folder labeled Special Projects. Inside were receipts from some of New York's most exclusive restaurants: Le Bernardin, Daniel, Per Se. Dinners for two, always on Tuesday nights when Thomas supposedly had his Chef's Guild meetings. The amounts were staggering: $500, $700, sometimes over $1,000 per meal. But it wasn't the money that made my stomach twist into knots. It was the fact that these weren't business expenses. They were personal receipts, carefully saved and hidden away. "Emma?" Kate's voice snaps me back to the present. She's standing in my office doorway, concern etched on her face. "The Riverside Terrace called. They had a pipe burst, and the Chapman wedding needs to be relocated. Like, yesterday." "Right. The Chapman wedding. My biggest event of the season, due to take place in just 3 weeks. Penny Chapman, social media influencer and lifestyle guru, with her 2 million followers eagerly awaiting every detail of her perfect day. The wedding that could make or break my reputation in the industry. "Tell them I'm on my way," I say, grabbing my emergency venue portfolio. This is what I'm good at: solving problems, putting out fires, maintaining control. But as I rush through Manhattan traffic, my mind keeps circling back to those receipts. Thomas has always been passionate about food, about experiencing new restaurants and flavors. But these weren't just casual dining experiences. These were intimate dinners, carefully planned and meticulously documented. The Chambers Hotel saves my day by offering their rooftop terrace for the Chapman wedding. As I walk through the space with their events manager, my phone buzzes with a text from Thomas. Had to cancel dinner tonight. Emergency at the restaurant. Rain check? My fingers hover over the keyboard. I want to ask him where he really is. If he's at Per Se again, sharing a tasting menu with someone else. Instead, I type, "No problem. Everything okay?" Just supplier issues. Don't wait up. I spend the next few hours reorganizing the Chapman wedding, making calls, adjusting floor plans. It's almost midnight when I finally get home to our apartment in Chelsea. Thomas's side of the bed is still made, untouched. Opening my laptop, I do what any self-respecting New Yorker would do. I start Googling the restaurants from the receipts, the dates, trying to piece together a pattern. That's when I notice something odd. Each restaurant has a connection to a famous female chef. Le Bernardin, Emma Thompson's first job. Per Se, where Sarah Chen did her apprenticeship. Daniel, where Michel Laurent currently runs the kitchen. Michel Laurent. The name triggers a memory. Wasn't she the one Thomas mentioned at that food festival last month? The one he said was revolutionizing French-American cuisine. My phone pings with an email notification. It's from the Plaza Hotel, confirming a meeting for tomorrow about the Morrison wedding. Thomas is supposed to be there to discuss the menu. It's the kind of meeting we usually love, sitting side by side, finishing each other's sentences as we plan the perfect culinary experience for our clients. But now, looking at the empty side of the bed, I wonder if we'll ever get back to that easy synchronicity. If we'll ever be that couple again. The ones who could anticipate each other's thoughts, who moved through kitchens and event spaces like dance partners, who knew every step by heart. The next morning, I arrive at the plaza early, hoping to catch Thomas before the meeting. He's already there, huddled over his phone in the lobby, frowning at the screen. When he sees me, his face lights up with that smile I fell in love with. And for a moment, all my doubts seem ridiculous. "Hey, beautiful," he says, kissing my cheek. "Sorry about last night. The fish supplier sent us sea bass instead of halibut, and you know how I feel about substitutions." I want to believe him. Want to lose myself in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and the lingering hints of whatever he's been cooking. But then his phone buzzes, and I catch a glimpse of the screen before he turns it away. A message from ML, with a string of heart emojis. The meeting goes smoothly on the surface. We present our ideas for an elegant fusion menu that blends the couple's Korean and Italian heritage. Thomas is brilliant as always, describing dishes in a way that makes everyone's mouths water. But underneath the professional polish, I'm counting the times his phone vibrates in his pocket. The way he checks it when he thinks no one's looking. After the meeting, I make an excuse about checking on rentals and watch as he hurries out of the hotel. Part of me wants to follow him, to see where he's really going. Instead, I go back to my office and throw myself into work. There are centerpieces to approve, seating charts to arrange, vendors to coordinate. But even as I move through my carefully scheduled day, I keep thinking about those receipts, about the message from ML, about all the Tuesday nights I ate dinner alone, believing Thomas was at his guild meetings. Kate finds me at 7, still at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet I haven't updated in hours. "Go home, Emma," she says gently. "Whatever it is, it'll look different in the morning." But will it? Because right now, everything I thought I knew about my perfect love story is starting to look like just another carefully staged wedding photo, beautiful on the surface, but hiding all sorts of complications just out of frame. As I pack up my things, my phone lights up with another text from Thomas. "Don't forget, cake tasting tomorrow for the Morrison wedding. Save the best for last." The emoji makes my heart ache. It's so normal, so us. But as I look at the message, I can't help but wonder, how many other best for last moments is he sharing with someone else? The cake tasting for the Morrison wedding should have been perfect. Instead, I found myself sitting beside Thomas in his test kitchen, barely tasting the exquisite flavor combinations he'd spent weeks perfecting. My mind was too busy translating ML into Michel Laurent and calculating the probability of their paths crossing at those high-end restaurants. "Emma, what do you think about the lavender honey buttercream?" Thomas's voice brought me back to the present. He was looking at me with those warm brown eyes, a slight frown creasing his forehead. I started, then realized I hadn't actually tasted it. Could I try it again? That's when I noticed something I'd been too preoccupied to see before. On the counter behind Thomas was a French culinary magazine. The cover featured none other than Michel Laurent herself, with the headline, "La nouvelle vague de la cuisine française en Amérique." My high school French was rusty, but I got the gist. The new wave of French cuisine in America. And there was Michelle, looking impossibly elegant in her chef's whites, dark hair swept into a perfect chignon, brown eyes sparkling with confidence. The same confidence I'd seen in all those Instagram posts Thomas had been liking lately. That night, instead of going home to toss and turn in our half-empty bed, I did something impulsive. I walked into the language studio, a small school in Greenwich Village that I'd passed 100 times while venue scouting. "I'd like to sign up for French classes," I told the receptionist, then immediately changed my mind. "No, actually, English classes." The receptionist looked confused. "English classes? But you're—" "For international business," I clarified quickly. "I work with a lot of international clients, and French chefs." That's how I met Sarah Chen, my English for business instructor, who would become much more than just a teacher. She was a former chef-turned-language instructor, who had indeed worked at Per Se, one of the restaurants from Thomas's receipts. "Most of our students are trying to learn English," Sarah said during our first one-on-one session. "You're the first native speaker I've had who wants to learn." What exactly? I found myself telling her everything. About the receipts, the mysterious text messages, the French magazine. About my fear that while I'd been planning other people's perfect moments, my own happiness had somehow slipped through my fingers. "So you want to learn the language of high-end cuisine?" Sarah asked, her expression thoughtful. "The specific English vocabulary that chefs use?" I want to understand their world better, I admitted. When Thomas talks about cuisine with other chefs, it's like they're speaking a different language, even though it's all in English. They have their own vocabulary, their own shorthand. Sarah smiled. Well, you've come to the right place. Before I started teaching, I spent 10 years in professional kitchens. I can teach you both the language and the culture. Over the next few weeks, my Tuesday and Thursday evenings were spent in Sarah's classroom, learning about mise en place, flavor profiles, and molecular gastronomy. She taught me how to read between the lines of chef interviews, how to understand the subtle hierarchies in professional kitchens, and most importantly, how to feel confident in a world I had only observed from the outside. You know, Sarah said one evening as we were practicing vocabulary, most relationships in the culinary world fail because of misunderstandings. Long hours, intense pressure, passionate personalities. It's a recipe for drama. Is that what happened with you? I asked, then immediately regretted my forwardness, but Sarah just smiled. I was engaged to a chef once. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple, both ambitious, both passionate about food. But we were speaking different languages, literally and figuratively. He was all about tradition. I wanted to experiment. He saw cooking as a science. I saw it as an art. What happened? We realized we were better as colleagues than partners. Now he runs a successful restaurant in Chicago, and I'm here, helping people bridge cultural gaps through language. Her words stayed with me, especially during the quiet moments when I was alone in my office, staring at the wall of happy couples I'd helped create perfect weddings for. Was that what was happening with Thomas and me? Were we speaking different languages without realizing it? The Chapman wedding was approaching fast, and with it, more opportunities for Thomas and me to work together. But something had shifted. Instead of feeling intimidated by his passionate discussions about cuisine with other chefs, I found myself joining in. I could talk about the difference between blanching and shocking, understand why a proper roux takes exactly 20 minutes, and even contribute to conversations about the latest trends in molecular gastronomy. Since when do you know so much about reverse spherification? Thomas asked one day, looking pleasantly surprised after I'd shared my opinion on a complicated dessert technique he was considering for the Chapman wedding. I've been studying, I said simply, enjoying the flash of admiration in his eyes. But even as I grew more confident in the culinary world, the mystery of those restaurant receipts and the text messages from ML continued to gnaw at me. Sarah had taught me enough about the chef community to know that those restaurants weren't just places to eat. They were networking hubs, places where deals were made and partnerships were formed. The culinary world is small, Sarah warned me one evening. Everyone knows everyone, and reputations are built as much on who you know as what you can cook. I looked down at my notebook, filled with carefully written terms and definitions. Somewhere between learning about mother sauces and wine pairings, I'd hoped to find answers. Instead, I'd found something unexpected. A growing sense of independence, a confidence that went beyond just understanding Thomas's world. As I packed up my things to leave class that night, Sarah called out to me, "Emma, remember, sometimes the hardest part of learning a new language isn't the vocabulary or the grammar. It's learning to trust that you have something worth saying." I nodded, thinking about the Chapman wedding tomorrow, where Thomas and I would be working side by side again. About all the things I wanted to say to him, in any language. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Big surprise for the Chapman wedding tomorrow. Can't wait for you to see it. I stared at the message, my newfound culinary vocabulary swimming through my head. In the world of professional kitchens, I'd learned, surprises could be either delightful or disastrous. I just wasn't sure which one this would be. The morning of the Chapman wedding arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that wedding planners dream about. Golden sunlight streamed through the Chambers Hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows as my team transformed the rooftop terrace into a Pinterest-worthy paradise. Everything was going according to plan until Thomas's phone rang. I usually wouldn't have answered it, but he was in the middle of directing his kitchen staff through a complex plating demonstration, and I recognized the international dial tone. My newly acquired culinary English made me feel confident enough to handle any chef-related call. Thomas Mitchell's phone, I answered professionally. Ah, bonjour. A woman's voice, warm and slightly accented. Is Thomas there? It's about tonight's special arrangement. My heart stuttered. Tonight? Thomas was supposed to be handling the Chapman wedding dinner service. I'm sorry, he's unavailable at the moment. May I take a message? I managed to keep my voice steady, even as my hand gripped the phone tighter. Just tell him Michelle called about our special project. He'll understand. Michelle. ML. Michelle Laurent. Of course, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. I'll let him know. I ended the call and stared at Thomas's phone, my mind racing. Special project. Special arrangement. All those receipts from high-end restaurants suddenly felt less like research and more like dates. Emma? Thomas's voice made me jump. He was standing in the doorway of the prep kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Everything okay? I handed him his phone. Michelle called, about tonight's special arrangement. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Guilt? Before he smoothed it into a professional smile. Thanks, I'll call her back later. Tonight's arrangement? I couldn't help asking. I thought you were handling the Chapman wedding dinner service. I am, he said quickly. The call's about something else, a potential collaboration. Before I could press further, Kate appeared with a crisis about the flower arrangements, and I was pulled back into the whirlwind of wedding preparations. But throughout the day, I kept catching glimpses of Thomas on his phone, texting rapidly, his brow furrowed in concentration. The ceremony went perfectly. Penny Chapman was radiant in her custom gown, her 2 million followers collectively sighing over the live updates. But as guests moved to the reception, I noticed Thomas checking his watch more frequently than necessary for someone coordinating dinner service. Everything on schedule? I asked, using one of the first phrases Sarah had taught me about kitchen timing. Perfect timing, he replied, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on his phone again. I threw myself into managing the reception, making sure every detail was perfect. The signature cocktails were flowing, the lighting was adjusted to Instagram perfect levels, and the band was keeping the dance floor packed. Everything was going so well that I almost missed Thomas slipping out during the main course. Almost. He said he needed to check on something at the restaurant, his sous chef told me when I asked. Said he'd be back for the dessert course. I knew I should stay at the wedding. There were 100 things that needed my attention. But Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts in the kitchen and in life. I grabbed my coat and followed my instincts right to Daniel, one of the restaurants from those mysterious receipts. From the sidewalk, I could see into the warmly lit interior. And there, at a corner table, was Thomas, sitting across from a woman I recognized from that magazine cover, Michelle Laurent. They were huddled over something on the table between them, talking animatedly. As I watched, Michelle reached across and touched Thomas's hand. Her face lit up with excitement. Thomas was smiling that special smile, the one I thought was reserved for me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All those English lessons, all that culinary vocabulary, and I still couldn't find the words to describe how I felt in that moment. My phone buzzed, Kate asking where I was. The Chapman wedding. Right. I had responsibilities, clients who depended on me. I forced myself to turn away from the restaurant window and hurried back to the hotel. I made it just in time for the dessert course. Thomas arrived a few minutes later, slightly out of breath, his chef's whites pristine, but his hair slightly mussed. He took his place beside me as if nothing had happened, directing his team to serve the elaborate dessert towers he'd designed. "Beautiful presentation," I commented, using the proper culinary terminology. "Thanks," he said, beaming. "I've been working on something special." Special. There was that word again. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. The Chapmans were thrilled, their guests were impressed, and social media was ablaze with photos of the picture-perfect celebration. By all professional standards, it was a tremendous success. As we supervised the cleanup, Thomas kept trying to catch my eye, but I stayed busy with vendor checkouts and final payments. I couldn't look at him without seeing him at that table with Michelle. "Emma." He finally cornered me as the last of the decorations were being packed away. "About earlier." "The dinner service was perfect," I cut him off, keeping my voice professional. "The clients are happy. That's what matters." "That's not what I meant." "I need to finish the vendor payments," I interrupted, turning away. "We can talk later." But later, in our apartment, Thomas got a text that made him rush out again, mumbling something about a supplier emergency. I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the professional-grade appliances we'd picked out together, feeling more lost than ever. I pulled out my phone and typed out a message to Sarah. "How do you say, 'I think my fiancé is in love with someone else' in chef speak?" Her response came quickly. "Come to class early tomorrow. Some things are better discussed in person." I looked at our engagement photo on the wall. Thomas and me laughing in his test kitchen, covered in flour from an impromptu food fight. We looked so happy, so in sync. Now I wondered if we'd ever really spoken the same language at all. My phone lit up with a text from Thomas. "Sorry about running out. Tomorrow will make everything clear. Promise." I stared at the message, thinking about all the culinary terms I'd learned. In cooking, clarity came from reduction, boiling things down to their essence. Maybe it was time to reduce this situation to its essential truth, even if that truth might break my heart. I arrived early for my English class the next morning. clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. Sarah was already there, arranging chairs in her classroom. But one look at my face, and she abandoned her task. "Let's walk," she said, grabbing her coat. "I know a place." The place turned out to be a small French bakery a few blocks away. As we settled into a corner table with fresh croissants, I noticed the name on the window. Laurent's. "Yes," Sarah said, following my gaze. "It's her family's bakery. Michel Laurent started here before she became, well, Michel Laurent." My heart clenched. "You know her?" "Everyone in the New York culinary scene knows Michelle," Sarah said carefully. "She's brilliant, innovative, and incredibly generous with her knowledge. She's also..." But what Michelle was, I didn't get to hear. Because at that moment, my phone exploded with notifications. Penny Chapman had just posted her wedding video, and it was going viral. Not because of the flowers, or the dress, or any of the 1,000 details I'd obsessed over. No, it was going viral because of the food. The video showed Thomas's dessert presentation in all its glory. But it wasn't just any dessert. It was an architectural masterpiece that told the story of Penny and her husband's relationship through a series of interconnected French and Korean-inspired pastries. Each tier represented a different milestone in their relationship, culminating in a sugar sculpture that caught the light like crystal. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, watching over my shoulder. That's what?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know. "That's Michelle's signature style, telling stories through sugarwork. But this is different. This is..." She was interrupted by my phone ringing. "Kate." "Emma, you need to get to the office now," she said without preamble. "The Ross wedding just moved up to next week and their guest list doubled." The Ross wedding. My biggest budget event of the year, originally planned for spring. Of course it would implode now. "I'll be right there," I said, standing up. "Sarah, I'm sorry." "Go," she said, understanding in her eyes. "But Emma, don't jump to conclusions. Sometimes the simplest explanation isn't the right one." The next few hours were a blur of vendor calls, venue negotiations, and menu restructuring. The Ross family had decided to combine their daughter's wedding with her grandfather's 90th birthday celebration, doubling both the guest list and the complexity of the event. I was deep in negotiations with a linen supplier when Thomas appeared in my office doorway. "Emma, we need to talk." "Can't," I said, not looking up from my computer. "The Ross wedding just got moved up. Unless you can magically produce a French-American fusion menu for 500 people by next Saturday." "Actually," he said, "that's what I wanted to discuss. I have a solution." Now I did look up. Thomas wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Michel Laurent. She was even more elegant in person than in her photos, her chef's whites crisp and pristine, her dark hair pulled back in that perfect chignon. But what struck me most was her expression, not smug or superior, but genuinely warm and slightly nervous. "Emma," Thomas said, "I'd like you to officially meet Michelle. She's been helping me develop something special for our wedding, but given the Ross situation..." "Your wedding menu is perfect for this," Michelle interrupted, her French accent lighter than I expected. The way you've combined classical French techniques with modern American flavors. It's exactly what the Ross family needs. We can scale it up, adapt it for the grandfather's celebration. I held up a hand. Our wedding menu? Thomas and Michelle exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. Perhaps, Michelle said gently, we should start from the beginning. But before she could continue, Kate burst in. Emma, the Ross family is on their way up. They want to discuss the menu in person. The next hour was a whirlwind of client meetings, with Thomas and Michelle presenting a stunning menu concept that seamlessly blended French sophistication with American comfort food. The Ross family loved it, especially the way it could be adapted to appeal to both wedding guests and birthday celebrants. I watched Thomas and Michelle work together, finishing each other's sentences as they described dishes and techniques. They moved through the culinary vocabulary I'd been struggling to master with effortless grace. And yet something wasn't adding up. The way they interacted wasn't romantic. It was professional, collaborative, almost educational. After the clients left, I found myself alone with Michelle, while Thomas stepped out to make calls to his supplier network. The receipts, I said before I could stop myself. The dinners at all those restaurants. Michelle's eyes widened in understanding. Ah, the research dinners. Thomas wanted to understand how each restaurant told their story through their menu. He was so determined to create something unique for your wedding. But the text messages, the secret meetings. She smiled. The messages were about the sugar sculpture techniques. Thomas is talented, but sugar work, it takes years to master. We had many disasters before getting it right. The sculpture you saw at the Chapman wedding? That was his final test piece. I sank into my chair, memories shifting and rearranging themselves like pieces of a puzzle. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the mysterious meetings, all of it taking on a different meaning. But why all the secrecy? That, Thomas said from the doorway, was supposed to be part of the surprise. He walked in carrying a large pastry box, which he set carefully on my desk. Inside was a sugar sculpture that caught the light like diamonds. As I looked closer, I realized it told our story. The venue where we met, the steps where we first talked all night, the kitchen where he proposed. This was supposed to be a practice piece for our wedding, he said softly. I wanted it to be perfect. Michelle's been teaching me, helping me understand how to capture memories in sugar and flavor. I touched the delicate structure gently, watching light dance through it. All those nights you were learning to be a better artist, Michelle finished, to create something as special as your love story deserves. My phone buzzed. Another notification about the Chapman wedding video, which had now been shared by several major wedding influencers. Looking at it now, I could see what I had missed before. The technical skills I'd been learning to recognize in my English classes, the combination of French artistry and American innovation, the countless hours of practice represented in each perfect detail. I should have told you, Thomas said. But you're so amazing at what you do, at creating perfect moments for others. I wanted to create something perfect for you, something that would show you how much our story means to me. I looked at the sugar sculpture again, seeing it through new eyes. Each delicate piece was a lesson learned, a skill mastered, a secret kept not to hide something wrong, but to protect something beautiful. Michelle quietly excused herself, leaving us alone with the physical proof of Thomas's devotion glinting on my desk. "So all this time," I said, "while I was taking English classes to understand your world better, I was learning to speak the language of love through sugar," he finished. "Although I have to admit, hearing you use proper culinary terms has been incredibly sexy." I laughed, the sound catching slightly on the tears I hadn't realized were falling. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "The perfect pairing," he corrected, using the wine terminology I'd recently learned. "Like a fine Bordeaux and—" "Don't push it," I warned, but I was smiling. My phone buzzed again, Kate reminding me about the Ross wedding timeline. Reality rushing back in with all its demands and deadlines. "We have a lot of work to do," I said, looking at the mountain of planning ahead. Thomas took my hand, his fingers warm and familiar. "Together?" I squeezed his hand, thinking about all the languages of love we'd been learning, through food, through words, through the sweet architecture of sugar and dreams. "Together," I agreed. "But first, you're going to tell me exactly what other surprises you have planned for our wedding." His eyes sparkled. "Now that would be telling, but I will say this. You might want to keep practicing your French culinary terms." The week leading up to the Ross wedding was a masterclass in organized chaos. But watching Thomas and Michelle work together, now that I understood the true nature of their relationship, was like witnessing a perfectly choreographed dance. They moved through prep lists and taste tests with the kind of synchronicity that only comes from months of practice and shared vision. "Your fiancé has a remarkable talent," Michelle told me one evening, as we watched Thomas demonstrate his newly mastered sugar-pulling technique to his kitchen staff. "But what makes him special is his understanding of how food tells a story." She was right. Each dish Thomas created for the Ross wedding carried echoes of the techniques he'd been perfecting for our own celebration. The way he layered flavors, the architectural elements in his presentations. It was all a rehearsal for what he planned to create for us. "You know," I said during a rare quiet moment in the kitchen, "I could have helped you with all this. You didn't have to keep it a secret." Thomas smiled, his hand steady as he shaped molten sugar into delicate flowers. "Would you have let someone else help plan our wedding?" "Of course not. I'm a professional—" "Oh." I caught his meaning and laughed. Point taken. The Ross wedding was a triumph. Thomas's menu seamlessly bridged the gap between wedding elegance and birthday celebration, while Michelle's guidance helped him create show-stopping pieces that had guests gasping in delight. But the real victory was more personal. Watching Thomas in his element, I realized that all those nights I'd spent learning culinary English had given me the vocabulary to truly appreciate his artistry. "Your sugar work shows remarkable laminar flow," I told him as we packed up that night, using one of the technical terms Sarah had taught me. His eyes lit up with pride and amusement. "Have you been studying molecular gastronomy behind my back?" "Maybe," I teased. A girl has to have some secrets. Later that night, back in our apartment, Thomas finally showed me his complete vision for our wedding menu. Each course was designed to tell a chapter of our story, From the amuse-bouche inspired by our first meeting to the grand finale, a sugar sculpture that would make the Chapman wedding piece look like a practice run. "Michelle says I'm ready," he said, showing me his sketches. "But what matters is what you think." I looked at the plans, understanding now why he'd needed all those research dinners, all those practice sessions. He hadn't just been learning techniques. He'd been learning how to translate our love story into the language of food. "It's perfect," I said, meaning it. "But you know what would make it even better?" "What?" "If we created it together." I pulled out my English class notebooks, filled with carefully written culinary terms and techniques. "I may not be able to pull sugar, but I understand the theory now. Let me help with the storytelling." The smile that spread across his face was brighter than any sugar sculpture could ever be. "You know what they say in French kitchens? La cuisine, c'est l'amour rendu visible. Cooking is love made visible," I translated, proud of my progress. "Exactly." He pulled me close. "And our love story deserves to be told in every language we know." In that moment, standing in our kitchen with the proof of our separate journeys spread out before us, his sugar sketches and my vocabulary notes, I realized something profound. We hadn't just been learning new skills. We'd been learning new ways to love each other. Thomas through his sugar work, me through my studies, both of us reaching across the divide to understand each other's worlds better. Michelle had been right when she said the simplest explanation isn't always the correct one. Sometimes what looks like growing apart is actually growing together in unexpected ways. Sometimes the perfect recipe isn't about following the rules. It's about understanding the principles well enough to create something uniquely your own. "So," Thomas said, pulling out a fresh sketch pad, "shall we start planning our menu together?" I picked up a pencil, ready to combine his artistry with my organizational skills. "Together," I agreed. That's the secret ingredient we've been missing all along. Our wedding reception was everything we'd worked towards, a perfect blend of his artistry and my planning, of French technique and American spirit. The menu told our story in courses. Each played a chapter in our journey. And the centerpiece? A sugar sculpture that captured not just our past, but our future. Delicate spires of sweetness reaching upward, strong and graceful, just like our love. Michelle was there, beaming with pride at her student's achievement. Sarah, too, raising a glass in celebration of our successful language lessons. But the real triumph wasn't in the food or the decorations. It was in the way Thomas and I moved through the evening, finally speaking the same language in every way that mattered. These days, our business has evolved. We still plan weddings, but now we offer something unique. Events where the food and the staging work together to tell each couple's unique story. Thomas teaches sugar work masterclasses, with Michelle joining as a guest instructor when her schedule allows. And I've started offering workshops for event planners who want to better understand the culinary world. Sometimes, late at night in our test kitchen, Thomas and I still practice together. Him teaching me the basics of sugar work, me helping him perfect his English pronunciation. We're not perfect at either, but that's okay. We've learned that the most beautiful creations often come from embracing our imperfections and working through them together. Last week, a young couple came to us for their wedding planning. The bride was a chef, the groom an event coordinator, As they talked about their vision, occasionally stumbling over technical terms, Thomas and I shared a knowing look. "Don't worry," I told them. "We speak both languages here." And we do. Because in the end, love is its own language, whether it's expressed through perfect place settings, sugar sculptures, or simply holding hands across a kitchen counter, dreaming up new ways to tell stories through food and celebration. That's the sweetest ending of all, knowing that every day we're writing new chapters of our story together, in all the languages of love we've learned along the way. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more stories in English and lessons. Click the bell icon to be notified when we post new videos. Your support means a lot to us. See you next time.